Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Classroom Matters with me, your host, Christy Houle. And I am delighted to be sitting down with Dr. Rick Chromey today. We are going to dive into the world of motivating students. I'm just going to leave that there because that in itself can be a lot. And I want to let our listeners know right up front before I even move into the introduction, we are going to do multiple episodes with Dr. Chromey. So what you hear in this one is going to be the tip of the iceberg on what you're going to hear in a couple other ones. So we're going to talk about motivating students today. Dr. Chromey is the president of, and I'm going to let you say this, is it MANNA or MANNA?
MANNA.
MANNA. Okay.
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
MANNA Educational, like banana.
Yeah.
MANNA Educational Services International, which is a nonprofit organization that serves schools, churches, and other organizations with inspirational edu-trainment.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about that too a little bit. He's penned over a dozen books on classroom management, leadership, and cultural analysis, including his most recent work, which I'm really excited about, GenTech, an American story of technology, change, and who we really are. Rick has a doctorate in leadership and specializes in American history, pop culture, and generations. So you guys are in Boise, you and your wife, Linda, and you were just telling me a little bit about the smoke that was coming in.
Yeah, actually, I'm looking out there today. It's not too bad. As I was sharing with you, a lot of us are running around very teary-eyed because the smoke has been pretty thick, but looking pretty good out there today. So we should be all right.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I mean, I guess it, could be better, but
that's August in Boise. We live in a bowl and the smoke just gathers in this area and it creates an inversion type of situation and you just live with it. It's part of life in the Treasure State and this valley.
Yeah. All right. So I gave our listeners a little tiny bit of your background, but tell us a little bit more about your journey and some of the things that you've done to get you to this point.
Yeah. Life is an incredible journey. I think when you start out, you never think about, you often dream about, oh, this is where I want to be in 10, 15, 20 years. But, if someone had told me that at this point in my life, I'd be running a nonprofit educational services organization, that I'd be even a professor, because in school, I was not your academic. I just celebrated my 40th high school reunion. Wow. And I think a lot of my fellow students were a little bit surprised, you've got a doctorate, because I was your C student. Most of my teachers kind of graded me by my last name. So, Chromey, you're a C, that's what you're going to be. And I was pretty content with that because I learned to excel in other things like theater and speech and writing. I was journalism. Those were all parts of my repertoire, as well as art. I was I was an art major in high school. So those more studious subjects like history and math. I still don't like math, but science, those type of things tend to be put to the side. And now what's interesting, coming full circle, I love history. History's become a big part of my repertoire as well, and especially American history, but even I come out of the church world. I was a pastor for a number of years, and then a professor of ministry. But my world at church and church history and stuff's always been of interest as well. So I have a real wide range of interests, and I just love to explore.
Wow. So, okay, I'm already going off my questions here because of something you just said in your intro, and it got me to thinking about what we're talking about, which is motivating students. And, the classroom obviously looks much different today than it looked when I was in a classroom teaching or being an administrator. And it's probably going to look much different in 6 months from now. We don't know. But when you were talking about when you were in school and you were not excelling in the academics and you ended up excelling in other things that maybe you had a passion for, do you believe that we put too much emphasis on students excelling in what we think they should excel in, such as math and science and reading and all of these things, as opposed to what we really could be learning are their passions, hence leads to kids not being motivated?
Yeah, I think that's well put. I also think we totally miss the the fundamental first principle of education. I always taught my education students, the first principle is this: use it or lose it. And your first job as a teacher is to help your students in some way or another, whether they're 5-year-olds or 15-year-olds, to recognize that this stuff is something you're going to use. I've always marveled at this great question that students ask, because it never was asked in my classes. I made sure this question was never asked. And it was simply this: is this going to be on the test? Because if a student is asking this is on the test, they have no use for the information whatsoever. You've made no avenue, you've driven no path towards this information being useful to them, except to get out of the class. So when they ask that question, they've already cued you that what they're learning about to them has no future use, no present use, and they're already disconnecting, and they're just trying to survive. It's a terrible question to be asked. And so that's a cue to you that you need to shift. You need to be more persuasive. Maybe you need to be more relative to the situation as far as making it fit for their lives. But yeah, and I think too that we often we do bring our own prejudices into the classroom as adults. I saw a study several years ago that in first grade or kindergarten, first grade, we teach students how to tell time. And it's like 30 clock hours to teach a first grader how to teach or how to tell time. But if we wait until their third grade, maybe even fourth grade, when they're using time more in their world, it's like a half hour, 15 minutes to teach it. So again, use it or lose it. If we just waited a couple of years to where they're using time in their lives, then it becomes more appropriate to talk about, well, here's how we tell time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so do you think, with all of that being said, because I know a large portion of our listeners are teachers, mm-hmm. and a lot of them are listening to this saying, yes, Rick, we agree with you. We want to be able to motivate our students, but we're also battling against what the district is telling us we have to do, what the curriculum is telling us we have to do, and the amount of time we have in a day. So where do we go with that argument?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I know full well that that situation. It's one of the things that really I struggled with too as a professor. I was within a faculty, discipline, and I had to teach to a particular curriculum that was laid out. I did have eventually some control over what classes were taught. I think that's different. If you're in public education, everything does come down from the district. You have a curriculum that's set for you. You have to teach to that. So I had some distinct advantages in the college area as far as my expertise that I think is different. You have to do what you can do, but that doesn't mean that you can't in some way make this information useful. I once taught a class on developmental psychology. I remember the first time I had to teach it. It was like, really? I don't know anything about developmental psychology. I didn't have a class like that myself. And here I was teaching it. And, I had to make it useful to me. And the first use was I have to teach this, right? So, and that's where it started. But I fell in love with developmental psychology as a result, and learning psychology in particular, how a person learns. But it was all because that class was put upon me. And I think that's the same way with, I always tell my students, when you come into a class, you have one of three attitudes. You either have a positive attitude, you want to learn this information, you're excited to learn this information, you've been waiting all your life to learn this information, or it's a negative attitude where, man, I don't want this, I don't need this, I don't like this. That's the way I was in math, by the way. Mm-hmm. And then a neutral, which means you're not one way or the other, you really don't know. So the job of the teacher is to take a student and their attitude, and this is where heart is so important. Effective education, and I'm talking effective, not effective, effective education, heart education is so important to the learning process, because what it does is we inspire first. We inspire, and that actually creates perspiration, because the student will work harder if they believe in it, if they agree with it, if they have value around what they're learning. So a lot of times we focus, at least today, and I think, again, a lot of this kind of gets into the politics of of education where it's about a cognitive process. What do they know? Let's teach to the test. I'm not in that camp. I really believe that education is more organic than organizational. I think we learn more spontaneously. I look at my learning adventures since high school. It's always been, oh, that interests me. I'm going to go look at that. I'm going to study that out. And in the process, I found that there was another 10 doors I needed to open up. Oh, well, let's just keep looking. And so it was constantly an exploration. And to me, that's what real education is. In the end, and maybe a great way of putting this, I heard this one time too, that in kindergarten, have you noticed that our children come to us with all these questions? They have a question mark. Everything is, a why or how or what and stuff. But by the end of their educational experience, they have periods. We put periods. And I think about high school is all about 7 or 6 periods. Really, they ought to be question marks, not periods.
Yeah. So those are some really great reasons why a lot of kids aren't motivated that, you've kind of just hit on for us. I mean, that all makes perfect sense. And I know when people listen to this, they're like, yes, because really it truly comes back to who we are as learners too. If you think about yourself, what motivates you to learn, what doesn't motivate you to learn is probably going to be about the same thing that is going to ring true for students in your classroom. So let's talk about 2 different camps of students when we're talking about motivation. You have the students that come in that actually care about their education. They care about being there. They know that they need to figure out what they want to do and how they're going to do it. They want to please their teachers and parents. But then you have some students that come in and for whatever reason, could be some precipitating factors coming from outside the school, they just don't care. They don't care about education, or they think they don't care, or they don't care about the class. So how do you go about motivating students in those 2 camps?
Well, I think it starts by recognizing, again, the motivational process. We can massage the message, if you will, in any way, and this is where incentives kind of drive a lot of this for educators. And we're going to get into talking about this, but I'm just going to start from the top and say that incentives, I think, are a poor idea when it comes to motivating a learner. And there's another number of reasons why, but the biggest is that in the end, they actually disincentivize or they de-interest a student who's learning. I don't want to call out any particular company or business here, but there are businesses out there that have, if you read so many books, we'll give you something, and what it does is it focuses the student on the something rather than to focus on the love of learning or the love of reading in this particular case. And so, for me, I think that's part of that process is, again, I looked at my own learning and, maybe it was just teachers were different back then, I don't know. But I never felt like one of the big things that's different is I don't think we were teaching to a test, back then. And that was such an advantage. Another thing that was interesting to me was I looked at my early in elementary school. I found my grades one day from elementary school, and I thought it was interesting. The grades were not A, B, C, D, or F or anything like that, which is what we do today, right? We give them these high evaluation type of grades. It was satisfactory, unsatisfactory, or if you did really well, you got an S plus or an S minus. Sometimes there was a plus or a minus, but it was either satisfactory or unsatisfactory all the way through 6th grade. I don't remember getting a letter grade until I got to junior high or middle school. And I think that was a very helpful part of the process, because as you're learning and realize education is building upon previous things that we need to know. We need to know our ABCs before we can really understand how to read. And as we read, we learn other disciplines as we go through. So it becomes it's a building process. And I love the satisfactory, unsatisfactory grade, or competent, or you're getting this, or however you want to say it. But again, if you're stuck in a situation where you have to give letter grades, I mean, it's part of the problem. Because what happens with letter grades is then they become monetized. I always tell parents the worst thing you can do is pay your kids for grades. Right. Again, it focuses them on the money as opposed to the evaluation. I mean, an A means that you are excellent, you're superior in this particular topic. And I can tell you, most students aren't superior when they start. But the millennial generation in particular was raised within this climate that if I don't hit an A every time, I'm in trouble. And or I'm a failure. That's what's, and without getting into too much of culture, but let me just give you an example. Recently, I think that's part of what's behind the Simone Biles situation. I turned to my wife when we were watching the opening ceremonies, and NBC had already had her positioned as a GOAT, the greatest of all time.
Yeah.
I mean, that's tremendous pressure. And then I saw an article in one of the I want to say USA Today, something like that, New York Times, one of those major article or newspapers, where they basically predicted that Simone Biles was going to take every single gold medal, except for I think they had one where they said she might get silver in this one. That's a lot of pressure. Yeah. And what happens is we lift that bar so high, then failure, any type of failure, or let's say missing the mark, then becomes absolute failure. And I think that's part of what happened with Simone Biles. And she uses the spins or the crazies or whatever she called it. I think that was definitely part of the physical part of it. But I think in the mental was once she started to not perform to the level, and remember, she had some early missteps, when she started not to perform to the level that she was expected to perform, I think she just shut down.
Yeah.
But, and I think students do that as well all the time. When they can't perform to the expectations of the environment, they just shut down.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you feel, you mentioned a little bit about some of the extrinsic rewards, and, everybody listening knows about the read this many books, get this, whatever. What about things such as, the positive behavior programs and character education, where those are more intrinsic and focusing on, behaving correctly and being motivated and being engaged and doing this, whatever, and then receiving something like a pat on the back or an attaboy or a party or something of that nature. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's what, first of all, if you're going to offer a reward or award or anything like that, an incentive, I always say, try to make it as close as possible to the behavior that you want. So if you want to reward reading, then reward with a book, not a pizza. Okay. I mean, let's make a book the reward, because that's part of the process then. So let me help you with the attaboys, the good,
the pats on the back,
on the back and those type of things. Cause obviously positive affirmation is key sure. to this process of positive motivation. And I don't have any problem with that. What I would encourage a teacher to do is move to what I call substantive praise. Substantive praise literally means that substance. Most of what we do is we give non-substantive praise. An attaboy, that's non-substantive. Good job, Johnny. That's non-substantive. Boy, I really like that. That's non-substantive. Those type of things. Substantive praise starts by recognizing what you're praising, and you praise the substance of it. So you say, let's say little Johnny, I'm trying to think of something, maybe does a math problem right, and he's been really struggling with it, and so he does it right. And so you say, Johnny, wow, look at that. You did it right. You got it right. That is a wonderful, wonderful thing that you've done there, because it's so important as you learn how to do math that you can do this particular type of problem. But then you take it to the next level and you attach your own feelings to it, because what great teaching is about relationship, right?
Yeah, of course.
So you say, you know what, it makes me feel good that I'm able to help you understand this. So, by the fact that you're doing that, that's great. And then what you do is you project it into the future. See, I think this is the part that a lot of teachers miss. What you want to do is take positive behavior and project it into the future and give them a dream. Give them something to think about. Well, hey, I never thought of that. So like with math, you might go, Johnny, you're starting to get this, and maybe you're not going to be a rocket scientist or anything, but I bet there's some math down the road that's going to be really a part of what you can do. Maybe a mechanic or an engineer, something like that's going to be of interest to you. Do you like to build houses? And you start to build a dream for them, and and then you back away, just enough just to get them thinking in the future. But that's substantive praise. And by the way, it takes a little bit more time. It takes a little bit more energy. It's one of the reasons why education struggles, because we have a lot of students in a class, and that individual time is a problem. I was fortunate. I'll be honest. We were fortunate enough to homeschool them, so we could spend a lot of time with this individual type of affirmation. But I know when I was teaching and I had 50 students in the classroom, it wasn't always possible. I had to do it outside of class more than inside of class.
Right. Yeah. And I think again, so many great points, and the type of praise that you use really sort of links me to the next question, about motivating kids authentically and honestly. It sounds to me like it sort of circles back to the genuineness and the relationship piece that teachers have with their children.
Yeah. So let's talk about the inner needs that drive us. And let me start by saying that every one of these inner needs work in opposition, or if you use incentives, they actually work in opposition to these needs. So you got to think about that. If you're using incentives to get students to do what you want them to do, they're actually working against these needs. And to give a metaphor here, because this is how it worked for me, was I was trying to think of a mind easy way to communicate this to my own students so they could remember this. I think great teaching is about making it memorable, so you remember it and you just go, oh yeah, I got that, I know it. And Abraham Maslow talked about inner needs. William Glasser's control theory speaks about inner needs, but I doubt many of us could just rip those needs off, because we did it for a test one time and then we kind of put it to the side. But when you're hungry, Christy, your stomach does something. It growls. There's a growling that goes on. And that's, as I was studying this, I was thinking, okay, how do we put this in a mind easy way? And growls became the metaphor. And it also became the acronym. So if you want to catch it, here it is. G, grace. I think deep down, we all hunger for grace. Now, grace is a very spiritual word, and it definitely comes out of my background, but I want you to understand it from just a purely pragmatic way as much as possible, because grace is actually messy. We look at grace is where creating an environment where fear is allowed, where failure is, it can happen, and there's it doesn't mean there can't be consequences, but it does mean that it's part of the process. You can mess up, you can make mistakes, you can, you don't do tests with a pen. You should be able to do tests with a pencil, so you can erase your work and think through it. So grace becomes very important. Grace is also about blessing. It's about surprise. A lot of times teachers will ask me, well, are you telling me I need to can the candy? I like giving out candy for good behavior or for doing something right. I say, absolutely not. Just don't make it the reason. I had a class one time where we just had a great time together. And at the end, I just say, hey, guys, gals, let's celebrate. And I just pulled out all these Snicker bars. I said, here's Snicker bars for everybody, whoa, because that's what it was. It was a surprise. They didn't earn it. Grace works in opposition to that works type of process. You got to do this, you got to do it perfectly, and then you get the prize. No, grace just happens. And I think when learning focuses upon grace and creates that, it just really explodes it. Secondly, R is relationship. Deep down, we all have this hunger to be connected, to collaborate, to commune, to have a conversation, all those great C words there, it's all about finding connection. And what happens with incentives is they actually disconnect. It creates, you become a cop or a judge, a lawyer, trying to, okay, you did it right, you didn't do it right. That's a disconnection of relationship. It separates peers from peers. It creates winners and losers. And I think that's probably the biggest danger with incentives is some people get it, and then some people, and really most people don't. And then you have the winners and the losers. And for the winners, they love rewards as long as they keep winning them. It creates that perfectionistic attitude. The O is ownership. Ownership is about empowering, well, let's just be honest. We're all control freaks at heart. We all want to be large and in charge. But this empowerment of ownership also means we have choice. We have contribution. We can use our skills, our talents, our abilities, our gifts. We can use them and find ways. That's what happened to me in school. I wasn't connecting in science class, but you take me to art class. Wow. That was where I really felt my gifts were there. The W is worth. inside all of us, we have this need to know what is our real true value, and I happen to believe human beings are completely distinct from the animal kingdom. I think there's such a, I know we share like 98% of similarities with chimpanzees, but I tell you what, there's a lot of a difference between a human being and a chimpanzee. I mean, when you think about what we can create, for example, and what we can do, you don't see chimpanzees running in the Olympics and doing things like that. You don't see them creating art like Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo. So it's amazing. You don't see them writing in amazing ways. So there's a difference there, and that value. Then we need to celebrate that value, and we do that by helping them to see what their voice is, what their vision is, what their value is. And I always tell teachers, these are the 4 power needs. Focus on these needs. Create environments of grace, relationship, empowerment, ownership, and value, basically dignity. You put dignity back upon the student. It spells GROW, and that we know spells grow. That's how you grow attention. That's how you grow affection. That's how you grow, just loyalty and everything else. And I would say even their production in the classroom, their ability to produce, better and better for you. The last 2 are what I call the primitive needs. They're the Maslow hit upon this, Glasser hit upon this as well. The L is laughter. You got to have fun. Yeah. That's why I'm an edu-trainer or an edutainer. I want to have fun. I want people when they leave my workshops to go, wow, that was not like any teacher training workshop I've ever had before. We actually had fun there. This is, I want to leave them with a smile because if you've studied educational research, what happens when you're learning and it's fun. Your brain literally lights up. It's like a Christmas tree. It just lights up. The last one I think is key though, and that is security. If a child does not feel emotionally, physically secure in a classroom, there's going to be trouble. That's why you got to have a no bully zone. That's why you got to constantly have your antenna up and watching how students are relating to one another, because that is key. A child will shut down, a teenager will shut down faster than ever if they feel insecure in your classroom. So that's the growls: grace, relationship, ownership, worth, laughter, and security. And if you feed those needs, you won't have to worry about massaging the message with incentives because they're already there.
Right. And I think the most important thing that our teachers can take away from that is think about themselves, because everything you just said is exactly what adults need.
Yeah.
And I think that if teachers need that and they realize that, then they can push that out into their students, because kids are just people too. They have the same needs and wants and desires that we do. They're just in a smaller body. And it also made me think, when you were talking about those things in growl, is think about, for my listeners, all of the teacher workshops. Oh my gosh. Like if I had a nickel for every teacher workshop I've sat in over the last 20 years, and I want my listeners to think about what you just said and how they feel when they sit in a workshop or a professional development session and those things aren't there. They can't wait to get out. They're never going to apply it. They're never going to have zest to move this thing forward at all. They're going to be grateful that they're done. But if they are in something, a workshop or a professional development class, like our students, and they're getting the things that you just mentioned with the growl, what are they going to do? They're going to leave excited. They're going to talk about it at lunch when they're with their teachers. They're going to want to talk to the instructors about how they can do more. They're going to look it up. They're going to, implement it in their classrooms, just like our students will implement the learning and apply it. So I think that's amazing. I think that's wonderful. I really hope that teachers remember that, and we're going to definitely list that, because I think that's so important in the description page. So for all of our listeners that, hopefully if they're driving or whatever, but where else can they find all this information?
Yeah, don't be texting yourself the growls, but just think growls. Yeah, obviously. But you're an administrator too, Christy, and this is so important for administrators, those who lead, principals, deans of your schools and stuff, because your teachers, you just said that you need this. Right. Imagine if you're living or working in a teaching environment where you have freedom, because that's what grace does. Grace produces freedom for you to be who you are, who you believe you're designed to be as a teacher. And that's a wonderful feeling. Relationship allows you to be you're part of a community. You feel loved, you feel wanted. Ownership gives you competence. You feel like you're competent to do this. Wouldn't you? We want all of our teachers to feel that way, and you want all your students to feel that way too.
Yeah.
And then obviously dignity, to feel like you have dignity, but to throw in fun and make this an enjoyable place, and obviously a secure place, a safe place. Wow. That would light education on fire if we had schools that were like that. My wife is a parateacher, and she worked for a school here in Boise a couple of years ago, and she did 1 year and was out. She said, I can't do that. She went to another school, and that school basically is like night and day as far as doing these type of things I'm talking about. And she loves it. But she was telling me, she was talking to a teacher at the former school just yesterday, and she told me they've had a 60 to 70% turnover just in the last 2 years.
Yeah, well, in culture and climate, right? Well, just with your wife. She went, and that trickles down to students. So if the administrators and the teachers are motivated and engaged and learning, then this is going to trickle down to the kids.
Yeah. If you're walking into the classroom as a teacher going, oh, I hate this, I can't wait, I got to figure out something.
We have to do this, kids, because it's on the test.
Yeah. And then you're just not going to, it's not going to be fun to learn under you. I mean,
and then we expect the kids to want to learn it when we obviously don't want to teach it.
No. I mean, even, I honestly believe there's some teachers that should not be teaching.
Oh, absolutely.
I gotta be honest, they're teaching only because they get a paycheck. And if you're listening to me right now, and the only reason you're teaching to get a paycheck, get out. Get out, please, for the sake of the students, get out.
Yeah. Well, and now, we're talking about, and I want to kind of try to wrap this up for this episode, but like I said, we could talk forever. But I want to touch on how the motivation and what it's looking like with learning styles, teaching styles in today's world of hybrid, remote. Teachers don't have a lot of control over what's happening with, if your kids are learning from home, how are the teachers going to control motivation if they're on a Zoom call with students? And so how is that motivation going to shift? And maybe how are teachers going to have to look at that differently if they don't have students in their classroom all day, like what we're used to?
Yeah, COVID kind of messed this thing up something fierce, didn't it?
Yeah, it did.
Here's the thing about COVID. I know that we all have this desire, and we think we're going to go back to normal someday. Let me tell you, COVID is not an interruption. What we've just experienced is a disruption. Things have changed, and they've changed dramatically, but they have been changing. Just to give you a little thought about the future here, we're moving very quickly into a purely digital culture. I love the book. I mean, if you turn the screen around, my entire room is full of books. I love books. I constantly buy, but you know what? For our children, they're not reading. One of the things that's interesting about the Gen Z or this Gen Alpha, these new generations that are coming up, the younger, those born since 2000 in particular, is they don't read newspapers. They don't read magazines. They don't read books very well at all, except when they're forced to do it. But they're very interested. They're using digital platforms in order to learn. They read, but they read online. So that means that our education in the future is going to have to be more digital. I don't think this is just a fancy experiment. The problem that we had in the last year, Christy, is this. And I've been an online professor. I did my doctorate in my doctoral project was creating an online degree, college degree, purely online. And so I've been doing this for 21 years as an online professor. And I can tell you, I do not teach the same way online as I do in the classroom. It's just a totally different environment. And there are all sorts of strategies and great techniques. And the problem that we had in COVID was we tried to force teachers, many of whom never even had an online class, to teach online. And we always do what we've always done. We go back and we teach how we taught in the classroom. And let me tell you, the lecture's dead. The lecture is dead. If you lecture, it's a dead strategy. Yeah. It's about conversation now. Can you create conversations? And even with the littler ones, and if you're familiar with the Khan Academy, I know many educators are, it's all about flipping the classroom. I love the concept of flipping the classroom. To me, we should have been doing that for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
That should be the model, is flipping the classroom. You come in to practice what you're learning out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. And I think it's amazing when you talk about the flipped classroom model, and, a lot of folks are moving into this outdoor classroom model and student led and collaboration. And, we are working with, and we're going to not get into this too much because I want to save a lot of this for our last episode when we talk about generational theory and those types of things and the differences. But, I have children that are, one's a senior in high school, one's in 8th grade, and one's in 6th grade. And they are so far advanced. They are so far above sitting in a desk and listening to someone talk at them that they just get nothing from it. And that's, the world that they live in with their peers is collaboration, discussion, having conversations, wanting to be critical thinkers, wanting to ask questions about things. And if we're not putting them in an environment where they're allowed to do that, then we're failing them miserably. And that's just what we have to look forward to as we move forward in this because I agree with you. This is not an interruption. This is the way things are going to be and are going to progress. We're never going back to the brick and mortar, the way that we know it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's brick and mortar, and the biggest thing you're going to see in the next 10 years is the university system is really going to be impacted. Mm-hmm. Gen Z, is just now hitting college. And guess what? They're not into classrooms.
No. And, I always find it so funny, and this is, a whole nother conversation. And I totally understand the issue with it in classrooms, but, we're still in an age where we expect students to put their cell phones, the thing that they hold nearest and dearest to them all day. They use it for everything.
Yeah.
Socialization, information, learning, everything that is a student today is a cell phone. And we still are expecting them to put them in lockers and be done with them for 6 hours while we teach them.
Yeah.
And it's just small things like that I think we have to start embracing and learning the technology ourselves and how students can benefit from it, as opposed to this is a bad thing and now we have to, change it up for 6 hours while you're here and be a different person. So yeah, that's a whole other conversation. But I get it. I understand why it's a distraction. So I think we're in the stages where we need to really be teaching teachers how to adapt.
And that's part of my work. I'm a cultural explorer, a historian as well. And so I have this, one thing nice about, I turned 58 this year. So I have this long history, and there's a beautiful thing about having a long history where you can look back and see the cycles. You start seeing, education's gone through particular points where it's kind of recycling all the time as well. But at the same time, you're able to look into the future and go, oh, now I get it. Mm-hmm. I see what's, and I'm just saying, hey, listen, my book I've written on generations in technology, I talk about how since 1900, we've had more technological change than in the entire history of the world. And in the last 20 years, we've had more technological change than the previous century. But buckle up, Buttercup, because the next 10 years, you ain't seen nothing yet as we move into holographic, artificial intelligence, and robotic technology. That's going to change education it's going to transform education, the hair technology.
Yeah. Well, so Dr. Chromey, thank you so much for this conversation. It has been amazing. So much great information. And just to remind our listeners, we will be recording another episode together, and I'm really excited. And in the second episode, we're going to hit a little bit on classroom management, some discipline, and how that looks now, what teachers can do now, and how we can change that, and how that's going to change over this next year as well. So thank you so much for being here to share this conversation with me today.
Thank you.
And this is Christy Houle signing off for this episode of Classroom Matters. And don't forget to check us out on our educate.today website. And I believe you can find all of Dr. Chromey's resources at www.mannasolutions.org or rickchromey.com, either one.